Hi, everyone. Welcome to Remaking Medicine. My name is Emily Peters, and I am here today with an incredible guest to talk about how we create, fund, and sustain arts programs in healthcare. So, Cynthia, would you go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody? We want to hear so much. We have so much to talk about.
I'll do it quickly, but I've had a long career. Um, my name is Cynthia Perlis. I have been I am the founder and director of Art for Recovery at the University of California, San Francisco Cancer Center. I started my career on the HIV unit in 1988 at UCSF. I retired in January of 2020, right before COVID, which was an excruciating decision for me to make. But I decided I wanted to see where I could take my experience and broaden it. And then about COVID happened, and about 3 months later, I was called by UCSF to come back to work for the Cancer Center to work on special projects, which is what I've been doing now for the past 4 years. I feel like I'm the luckiest person in the whole world because I get to do the work that I love and because it's really important for me in my lifetime to be of service.
Oh, I love that. I do feel like you are the luckiest person in the world.
Mhm.
I've already gotten to hear about your career. So let's the format of what I want to make sure we cover today is I want to hear about your incredible program with UCSF, then and the new approach that you're working on today. But more importantly, I want to get into the tactical pieces of how you created and funded and sustained this program because I think you have so much incredible advice to share with people who want to do arts programs in healthcare to make them lasting, things that will go on for literally 30 years. But first, go back to 1988 and tell us about the arts program and what you started doing.
Okay. I saw a little article in the newspaper. I had moved to the Bay Area from Washington, D.C., outside of Washington, D.C., which is where I grew up. Moved to the Bay Area, and I had worked for the Smithsonian at the National Museum of American Art. Came out here, and it was just so different than anything that I'd ever known. My kids were very little, and I saw a news article in a newspaper in the Bay Area that was asking for artists and musicians and poets and writers to go to the homes of the homebound elderly. And I thought that was really interesting because I had little kids and because I'm an artist and because it would fit into my life. And so I walked in to call the person up. He asked for my CV. I sent him my CV. Nothing happened for 4 months. 4 months later, he called me up. He said, would you come into Mount Zion, which was 1988, which was before Mount Zion was actually connected to UCSF. I went down to Mount Zion. I met him. I walked into his office and he said to me, it's very political here and I think you would fit in perfectly. And he says, I'd like to introduce you to an oncologist who is looking for someone with your skills. And so he walked me across the street. I met with the oncologist, and literally in 15 minutes, the oncologist hired me. And I looked at him and said, you don't even know me. And he says, I know you well enough. And so my first day, he met me in the lobby of the hospital. We rode up in the elevator to the HIV unit and the doors opened. And I always describe this as this sense of awe in not necessarily a great way, but awe in an amazing way. So the elevator's door opened. All I saw were doctors and nurses running down the hallway with their white coats flying behind them, looking for the AIDS hotline. It was a red phone because they had gotten needle sticks. I could smell the disinfectant and I could smell the death that was happening there. But I could also smell the beauty and witness people who were just filled with love and passion. It took a lot to be on that unit, and I was standing there. The elevator doors open. The oncologist left me. I had no one to train me. They put me in a room where the nurses made their private personal phone calls, and I got a cardboard box and I bought some art supplies, and I was told to wear a mask, gloves, and a gown to go to the bedside. And that is exactly what I did. And with the first patient, I walked in and I said to him, you must be really afraid. And he looked at me and he said to me, you know, he said, there's no hope in 1988. There was no cure for AIDS. There was nothing anyone could do. And he says, no one lets me talk about how afraid I am. Everybody's telling me I have to have hope, that everything's going to be okay, but everything is not going to be okay. Wow, that's lesson number one, right? That sometimes everything is not okay.
Yeah.
I sat down at the bedside and I did something which probably wasn't appropriate. I took off my mask because I felt like everyone who was walking in there was wearing a mask and he couldn't really see anyone. And I took off my gloves, my latex gloves, and I touched him
Mm,
because I knew, in fact, that AIDS was transmitted by blood.
mm,
And I was very careful, but he hadn't been touched at
mm,
all. And this
mm,
young man was 20 years old. His partner had died. He had taken care of his partner. And his parents had not come to visit him. They were afraid of AIDS and they didn't like the fact that he was gay. And so I found myself really falling in love with the work, falling in love with the patients. Um, Felt that it was a huge privilege in my life to be there, to sit at the bedside and talk to these people.
mm,
I would sit at the bedside. I would ask them to tell me their stories where they would talk about perhaps seeing a light, having died and come back to life, about their lack of family or lack of people coming to visit them, their pain and what they were feeling physically. And I would ask them to draw an image of something that they had just told me. And maybe it was that they were really afraid, or maybe it was afraid that they were really alone. And I
mm.
got a lot of, I can't draw, or I don't know how to draw. And I was like, there's no grades here. This is nothing that's going to go in your health file. This is just really about you. And so they would draw something. I would have markers or colored pencils, something very easy, and they would start to draw. And I would literally walk out of the room with their drawing in my hand, like this, and I would show it to everybody who would look at it. I would show it to the nurses, the doctors, the psychologists, everyone. And about a week later, I was invited to grand rounds, and I was invited to share the stories of these patients in a different way, through their artwork, which was pretty amazing. So that's how I started my work. I loved it. I can skip to the next thing that happened. Was I decided in 1989 to do an exhibition of the patient's artwork, the AIDS patient's artworks. And I had no idea how I would do that or where I would do that, but I found a location and I was very excited about that. And we framed all the pictures and I had no money. I had no funding. I didn't know how I was going to do this. So I went down to Montgomery Street in San Francisco and I started knocking on the doors of art galleries. And I told them what I intended to do. And I asked them if they would give $500 because I wanted to do a very beautiful postcard invitation to send out. And then the oncologist that had hired me thought this was such a great idea that he asked some of the people, some of his patients actually, that he thought might be interested in donating. And so I was able to put on this exhibition, hence my experience at the Smithsonian, where I helped to curate exhibitions. Um, and 400 people came. There was a huge crowd, and there was one patient who was already in hospice, and I loved him, and he had about 15 pieces of work that were going to be on exhibition. And so I called hospice in the morning and I said, I really want him to come. Do you think he could come? And I had asked a nurse at UCSF if she could come, she could go to him and help him, because he was on oxygen at that time and he was in a reclining wheelchair. And when I called up at 8 o'clock in the morning to the hospice and said, how is he doing? Because I really hope he can come that night to the reception. And she said, well, actually, he's all dressed and he's in a suit and he can't wait to come. And he
Oh,
came in a reclining wheelchair and he was the hit of the party. And remember, in 1989, people were still really afraid of what it meant to live with AIDS. And yet people came up to him, they talked to him, not necessarily about how ill he was, but about this incredible artwork that he had done. So that's really the beginning. At that point, I went from having this office that I shared with the nurses to actually getting my own office on that Monday morning. There was something about the people who came who recognized the importance of this. And this was really one of the first arts and health programs in the country in it was starting in 1988 for me. So
Wow.
that's how I began, changed my life completely, knew that I wanted to make it grow, knew that I wanted to create a really big program. You know, when there's a fire under your tail, you can do and believe that you can do just about anything. And
Uh-huh.
also, I had many people who believed in me, including the UCSF administration, including the oncologist who hired me, who believed in this so much. He used to say to me, of all the programs he's created, this is the one that he felt would continue to be the most successful. And 36 years later, it still has sustainability because UCSF believes in it and the importance of art and healing. Yeah.
Oh,
So
oh,
many
we're
stories to tell, but that's basically the beginning.
I love especially this parallel of you having those open, the elevator doors open and walking into this very intimidating, very scary situation. And being so brave to go up and ask somebody about what they were afraid of and how they were feeling. Have you always been so fearless? Is this just part of how you were built? Or is this something that, did you not realize what you were stumbling into?
Well, I think it's all of that. I think I didn't realize what I was stumbling into. I live a very kind of suburban life. My kids were well, they were very young then, but um, I have a great deal of empathy and compassion. It's just my makeup and optimism also.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I wasn't afraid. I was never afraid. I was sad many times when these patients died, and I felt like I knew them in a way that maybe other people didn't know them at that time in their lives.
Mhm.
Um, but my mother was calling me 3,000 miles away saying, "What are you doing? Are you being careful? Are you taking care of yourself? Why don't you come home?" Um, and yet there was this opportunity for me to not only be with these young men and learn from them, but also to learn about myself and what I was capable of.
Mhm.
And because my father had died when I was so very young, my father dropped dead when he was 32 and I was 2 years old. I
Gosh.
really believe that in some ways this was my search to understand what it meant to die and what it meant to be alive. And so these patients and the Dr. Rosenbaum, who had hired me, gave me this incredible opportunity in my lifetime. Sometimes we're placed in a situation where we don't even know the gifts that we're given,
Uh-huh.
and those gifts have sustained me throughout my life. And
Wow.
when COVID happened and I had an opportunity for the first time in my life to stop and to reflect, a lot of people hated the COVID and they had to stay inside and all that. I thought this was the greatest thing. I mean, because I am a busy person. I have a lot of things I want to do in my life, but this was an opportunity to stop, to
Mhm.
really stop. There was no place to go. My husband and I were home. He was working at home too. And I started reflecting on what my AIDS patients might have looked like had they lived and grown old. And
Mhm.
so, for that, I was very grateful. And that, of course, led to my getting an art studio in Sausalito. And the first 6 paintings I did were what these young men might have looked like had they lived and grown old.
Wow, a whole generation of people that we lost. Yeah. Wow. So I think one of the things that really stands out to me, of course, there are so many parts of your story that are so inspiring, and I'm so glad that you've been able to do this work. But what we often hear with this kind of program is that it has sort of a shorter shelf life, right? Like a lot of these programs get created um, in similar ways as there's a single physician or department head who has kind of an
Mhm.
idea, and there's a crisis and there's an opportunity, and the program gets created and it has a big art gallery opening and it's really successful. And then what I see so often is it kind of goes for 2 or 3 years, they get the press release, they get the story in the Chronicle, and then on to something new. That physician moves to another hospital or something happens and the program does not continue for 30 years. So that's where I really want to especially get your expertise and be able to pick your brain, because I think that is such a special element of what you've been able to do. And UCSF gets some credit, of course, for supporting you, but I have a feeling a lot of this is you and what you did. So tell us the secret to running a 36-year arts and medicine program.
Well, I guess there are a lot of secrets. There's passion. I think that's the most important, that I just love this work.
Mhm.
But also, I realized early on that in order for me to do the things I wanted to do, I'm a very creative person. I have a lot of ideas, a lot of projects I had in mind, and I didn't want to have to go to UCSF administration and ask for funding all the time, because they might tell me I couldn't do something. And
Mhm.
so I so believed in what I wanted to do that I learned how to raise money. And I learned by talking to the physicians, many who had cancer research funds or other funds, and got to know them, because, to be quite honest, I think raising money is really about building relationships. And so
Mhm.
I wanted them to know what I was doing and how it affected their patients. I also think raising money is about moving people. We've
Mhm.
all been touched by life-threatening illnesses. We've all had loss in our lives, and I really wanted to speak to that, to those who I felt could relate and would be interested in contributing to this. And
Mhm.
so I learned how to also write grants. And there was a funding arm at UCSF where I could write a grant every year, and hopefully, they would approve it, and they did every year. And then I met people along the way. I did projects where the Firefly Project, where I connect our patients through a monthly exchange of letters with UCSF medical students. And they exchange letters throughout the entire year, and they meet at the end of the year. And one year I had a young student who was participating, whose father came to the end of the year healing service. And he came up to me, and at the end of the healing service, where I had all the patients and the students speak about their experience, and he said to me, I want to give you a gift. I love what you're doing. And
Mhm.
he did. I mean, the following Monday, I got a call from the UCSF Foundation and said he had contacted them already, and he had a bunch of questions, and could I answer them right away? And the foundation came over to my office that afternoon. And so it was all those beautiful
Mhm.
contributors, those people who really believed in the program, that were able to build it. I even had a couple who had gone to the UCSF Foundation. They were getting married for the second time. They were an older couple, and they wanted to give a donation to UCSF. And the person at the foundation said, there's this great program, Art for Recovery. I want to tell you all about it. Well, they fell in love with it. And when they got married, instead of gifts, they asked for funding to be given to the program. In addition to that, when people have died, they've asked that funding be given to Art for Recovery. So I was able to raise a lot of money. But I always feel it's not the amount of money that I've raised, it's the fact that people believed in the program. It's
Yeah.
the fact that people want to do something to honor the loss of everyone that they know. And the other thing about raising money for this program was that it wasn't about giving money to a machine
Mhm.
or to salary. It was really about giving money that would go directly to support the patients.
Mhm. So the fundraising, let's just get super tactical because I know so many people want and need to know this, especially right now with funding and austerity things coming ahead. So the funding that you would raise, you would go out and get the funding, but it would come into the UCSF Foundation, and you had
Correct. They established an art for recovery fund
okay.
in the UCSF Foundation. So all the money would go in there.
Got it. So that was your nonprofit status that people could
Correct,
donate
correct,
in.
because the foundation has a
Mhm.
board, and
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. And
yeah.
then tell me some things like I'm sure along the way you learned some lessons, do's and don'ts around fundraising. Obviously you're talking about how it's aligning to the mission, it's aligning to the things that people really resonate with. Any other, you know, did you remember expectations that you had around fundraising that were wrong, or tactics that you tried that didn't work? What are some best practices that people should think
Well,
of?
I always laugh because pretty much nobody ever turned me down. So, and I also, I'm on this board of the National Organization for the Arts and Health.
Mhm,
It's NOAA.
mhm,
And I always tell people, that fundraising is about relationships
mhm,
because people want to know how to fundraise.
mhm,
People want to know how to bring that on, but it's very complicated because I had an administration that believed in me and believed in the work. I
mhm,
had a UCSF foundation, the big umbrella over my head, right, that supported my raising money.
mhm,
I was very lucky. I wasn't like a single individual trying to make a program work in a hospital where people weren't really sure what I was doing.
yeah.
I was in a place where I brought a lot of attention back to UCSF.
Mhm,
Um, and I had been on TV, and there have been videos made, and there have been articles made, and that's all well and good. And I'm very grateful and appreciative for all of that. But it also brought attention back to the patients.
mhm,
And to me, that was everything,
yeah.
because when these people are very ill,
Mhm,
and I moved on from the AIDS to cancer patients because thank God the AIDS patients were able to find a drug cocktail that really helped them survive.
mhm,
So I moved on to the cancer patients, but whatever I could do to support these patients was really important to me. And that meant meeting their families as well. It's not just the patients, cancer affects everyone.
mhm,
And then creating relationships with those family members also.
yeah.
So I would say for me, I feel very fortunate. There were very few times, I can't remember any time that I was turned down. Maybe I didn't get as much money as I hoped,
Mhm,
but I got something. And the other thing that's really important for people to know if they need to raise money is stewardship, to
mhm,
acknowledge continually those people that have given money, to
mhm,
send letters with updates about how the money is being used, to thank people, to let them know that the program has sustainability and it will continue. Because again, people don't want to give money to something that they feel is needy or
mhm,
will not succeed unless the money is given to them. They want to give money to something that's successful, right?
mhm,
And that will carry on for years to come. And I
mhm,
think that that's really important because some people go out and they try to raise money and they're desperate. They're
mhm.
really desperate. And nobody wants to give money to something that's desperate.
You don't want to be the last person to give money to a program, right?
Right. And the program's going to go away and you're going to wonder what happened to your money.
Yeah, yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. I think it's interesting that you talk about it in that relationship way because I think that is where a lot of people get hung up on sometimes feeling like, that this is damaging to a relationship that I have with somebody that I would ask them for help or I would ask them for funding. But I think
Right.
you have a different perspective on that, right?
Right. Yeah. And yeah, it's just really interesting to have these relationships with these funders, which I work really hard. It's like my friends. I work really hard
Yeah,
on relationships with friends. I
yeah.
think it's really important. And I think even with you, Emily, I mean, I think that we will have an ongoing relationship because it's
I
important
hope,
probably to both of us. Uh, but I just feel so fortunate to have all the people, the patients, the medical staff, the funders,
yeah.
my family, my friends, my husband, all the people that have supported me doing this work. And I don't mean necessarily even financially. I
Yeah,
just mean this is really hard work. People
yeah,
die. and I have spoken at a lot of funerals. I've done the eulogies for people who have died. And I miss some of those patients because it's been really important for me to create a relationship with them also. Whether through them personally or through their artwork, I can feel them and really see them.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's been pretty amazing that for me that so many people have believed in the work and
Yeah.
in me.
Yeah. Uh, other tactical advice that you would give people? I mean, I think I want to get back to more about the impact of your work and then what you're doing now too, but just any other advice on things that you think are really crucial, especially probably after that initial few years, kind of getting your momentum, getting your program going. How did you avoid burning out on the financial side or the, sustaining the program side, or was that never a concern? Because the work always, was so important and, you just felt this mission to always do it.
I did. I've gotten really tired. But the thing about being an artist or a creative person is that's the way I express myself. And
Mm,
so there's always a new way. And in art for recovery, and even now, I'm always creating new projects, and that always keeps it exciting. It's never the same thing. It's not like I'm doing the same thing every year. Every patient I meet is different. Every patient's needs are different.
mm,
Administration changes. There are new people there. Um, the family members are incredible, and they're a part of the life of the work too. Keeping in touch with the funders is really important.
mhm,
So, all this around me, and then learning how to take care of myself in between all this, which is going to my art studio, right?
mhm,
Or being with my grandchildren who are the light of my life,
mhm,
or my husband and I being able to take a trip where I can step back from
mhm,
the patient work for
mhm.
a moment in time, even though I think about them, but step back from them for a moment in time, and then step back into this world when I feel refreshed and replenished.
Yeah. Was there ever a point where it was a risk of the program becoming too big or getting too much funding? And getting to being like was there a risk of it becoming something that kind of, bloated out, or was that never a concern?
Well, it's a big program. It's
Yeah,
still
yeah,
36 years later. I mean,
yeah.
my former assistant was hired as the director of Arts Recovery when I retired. She and I keep in touch
Oh,
constantly.
uh-huh.
Um, and it's UCSF, and again with the NOAA, the National Organization for the Arts and Health, there are programs like this across the United States now, which
Mhm,
is pretty exciting. And
mhm,
being on the board and being just and having returned from Houston for their most recent conference, what's
mhm,
happened is I got home and there were 4 or 5 emails from people that I met at the conference who wanted to know how to create a program like this, or how do
mhm,
I fundraise? That's the biggest question that I'm asked is how do
mhm,
you fundraise? How do you bring in money?
mhm. Because you were very, very good at it. I think
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
why they're asking you.
But again, it's really about the passion. It's like I
Yeah,
so believe in what I do
yeah.
that it's like, how could someone, I mean, I can see, my challenge is to go to lunch, or used to be to go to lunch with a physician and to convince them to convince themselves how
Mm,
important arts and health were. And
yeah.
and that's a skill. I mean, I had to learn how to do that. You know, and then to be grateful, and then to also acknowledge, that is just like across the board, the stewardship letters, the updating, acknowledging people, because people don't sometimes just give once, sometimes they give many times, but they have to know how their money is being used.
Yeah, that appreciation and that
Hmm.
transparency into the impact. That's amazing. And throughout all of this, you were also still doing the art, like with patients through the entire process in
Correct,
36.
correct. I had the big
Yeah.
business side, the administrative side that I had
Mhm.
staff, I had evaluations to do, all of that.
Mhm.
And I wrote 6 books during that time. Some were workbooks, some were smaller books,
Yeah.
bedside manners, what to say and what not to say to people who are ill.
Yeah.
So all that time I was doing all these things I needed and really wanted to do.
Mm.
And yeah, yeah, and then always working at the patients because that's really my heart.
Yeah.
That's where the work is.
That's so amazing. And so tell me about, I think the impact on the patients is so clear in the way you've talked about it, and that ability to feel seen, to feel heard, to, have a chance to say your truth, to say your piece, especially at the moment when, you're at the end of life. But tell me also about the impact on the nurses and the physicians, like you talked about carrying around the art and showing it to people. What was that
Right.
relationship like? And was that something you expected, or was that different than you expected, maybe?
Um, well, I saw that there was a huge need for the nurses,
Mm,
especially the nurses, to
mhm,
understand what we were doing because in many ways we could assist them.
mm,
And relieve them. So I created a workbook, which just is a workbook full of prompts to ask the patients. And what I did is I did an in-service with the nurses and put the workbooks on their floor. And with art materials, so they could actually take the workbook to the patients
mm,
and they could engage with the patients. They wouldn't have to stay with them, but they
mm,
could have a whole conversation with the art that the patients might have created from the prompt in the workbook. So they got relief, so they didn't have to keep running in.
mm,
And the patients got to create art and to be seen in a different way by the medical staff.
mhm,
The other thing that happened was I started doing in-services and I called it Employee Wellbeing projects with the medical staff. So
mm,
basically we did journal books. So I went to the head of the cancer center and said, I really would like the medical staff to be able to take off a half hour or an hour during their shift to
mhm,
come to a conference room to do a creative project. And I would go around and I would talk to the nurse manager on the floor and I would sign the nurses up to make sure that they were covered while they came to the conference room.
mm,
And then, for instance, an example of a project would be a journal book. So I got beautiful handmade paper.
mm,
I had everything cut to size because time was important. And I talked to them about creating their own journal book. And this journal book could be used for themselves if they wanted to write about the patients or what they were feeling or whatever they wanted to write about. But it could also be used as a department. So
mm,
everybody in the department could write something to that patient's family who had just died, and
ah,
they could send it to them. And on the back of the journal book, it says, made with love by such and such a nurse. And so, there's that way that it gets like, you throw a pebble into the water and it makes all these ripples. Well,
yeah,
that's what this is like, right? I create a project. It's like a pebble. I throw it into the water. It has all these ripples. Like, how am I going to do this? Who am I going to go to make sure it can happen administratively? And then, have the funding because I've raised it to get beautiful handmade paper for the cover of the journal book
yeah,
and to really have instructions and have people come and sometimes talk the administration into providing food because people always come when there's food and
mhm,
and move forward with that.
yeah,
Same thing with these 6 by 6 inch canvases that have created community with, and especially with the medical staff. I'm working on this new UCSF outpatient cancer center in Burlingame. And I'm doing the Canvas project again. And so I worked with the woman nurse who's the head of mammography for all of UCSF. who said she would love to have her staff participate in the Canvas project. And she would provide lunch for everybody. And so I went last week to Mission Bay, and with all my projects and getting help, unloading my car and moving it all in there. And I have probably 50 canvas, 6x6 inch canvases that they all did, and told me how much they loved it. And some of them even told me that they had done this before, like 5 years ago, because I've been doing this Canvas project since 2004. And, we're so excited to come back and do this again.
Well,
So,
I just love that. It's almost like you've created an ecology. I think that's a big piece of the sustainability in your program as well. Like, I love how you're talking about it's not just getting money in, helping the patients, right? That would be one way that that would be a reasonable way to think about creating a program like this, right? But
right,
by the way that you're involving all these different people and creating value for all these different people, it's so efficient, it feels like to me, right? So you're creating these recesses for the clinical staff. That's hugely powerful and valuable, right? You're
right,
giving them that's incredible value to them. They're writing these beautiful letters. That's a gorgeous value to the patients and to the families and to the clinicians themselves. I can imagine that those booklets, those journals are a very powerful fundraising tool as well, because people are seeing the impact of this work and how you really changed the conversation and how their person was loved and seen in the hospital. And I just love this, like, the tapestry that you have created here that is very like self-fulfilling, right? That you're creating value for all these different people. And then, of course, the fundraising comes in that model. Like, of course, you have the support because
right.
it's just very like interwoven, right? I think that's so smart.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, and as I said, I'm a creative person, so part of this is just, what can we do? Like, how do we create community in the hospital, right?
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
done community projects where I've had housekeeping, I've
Yeah.
had, the people who work in the cafeteria,
Yeah.
I've had nurses, I've had security staff, I've had patients, I've had physicians all together sitting at a table
Hmm.
doing art,
Well, I love that.
which is really, beautiful and important. And even uh, I've had for the new buildings at UCSF, because I work with the architects on the new building, being the voice of the patients as we select the artwork.
Yeah.
And I had the construction workers come. And
Yeah.
the architects came, and here come these guys, and they got
Uh-huh.
their belts on with their stuff, and they're building the building. And I really wanted them to understand who they were building the building for, and
Mhm.
how is it going to feel for these cancer patients to be there, and how is it going to feel for them knowing that they were building this beautiful healing environment for these cancer patients. So that was really important to me.
I
Yeah,
love that. There's such power in listening, and we've really lost a lot of those muscles, right? I
right,
think people are so scared. It's always really amazing to me when I go and I speak to a bunch of healthcare executives who are very powerful and influential people, and then they're so scared to ask, to listen to people in the community,
right,
to just feel like very afraid of having those conversations or asking somebody how's it going, how are we doing. And regardless of the conversation, which always is so valuable, that you always get so much from that conversation. It's such an incredible persuasion tool to be seen as somebody who is listening, right? And to be seen
right.
as somebody who cares about what someone else has to say.
Yeah,
Just such an incredible piece of persuasion tool that we
right.
don't use often enough at all, right? And it seems like a huge part of your story.
Well, and I get often asked, like,
Mhm.
oh, I could never ask anybody for money. And that's what people say to me.
Yeah.
Or I feel uncomfortable going to the bedside and asking the patients about their lives,
Mm.
and it's just like, in a marriage or even with friends or with kids, there's a way of asking for
Mhm.
things, right? That where people feel valued because you're asking them.
Yeah.
Way of talking to a patient where they feel valued because you're interested in their lives.
Mhm.
And there's a value to being a mindful listener, to really learning how to listen
Mhm.
well,
Mhm.
and leaving your own personal baggage outside the door so that when you walk into a patient's room, or
Mhm.
again, even with friends, or, I used to do this project with the medical staff to practice listening.
Mhm.
How do you listen really well? How do people feel heard? I always say people only want three things in life. They want to feel heard, they want to feel seen, and they want to feel loved.
Mhm.
And that's really what it's about. But we all need to be better listeners now, even in our own personal worlds. We need to understand what it means to really listen to someone.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
That is so powerful. So tell me more about the work that you're doing now, because as you said, you had this retirement, although you did not slow down at all. You just became more prolific in different areas of your life. Tell me about the work that you were pulled back into UCSF to do, and these construction projects. Tell me about this next evolution in your journey.
sure. Well, about 3 or 4 months into my so-called retirement, I was asked to come back by the head of the Cancer Center at
Mhm.
UCSF, and to work on special projects. So what did that mean? Well, she's great. She's like, I'm really creative. Cindy, whatever you want to do is great. So
Mhm.
I continued the Firefly Project. I started the Firefly Project in 1992. I've done it every year since with the medical students and the patients. And so I've continued that project. I have been asked to I also co-lead a patient support group every Wednesday with
Mhm.
the new director of Art for Recovery. For many years, probably for 20 years, I worked with the UCSF interior architects on all the new buildings that were being put up, including Mission Bay, and
Mhm.
with the art consultants there. So I learned a tremendous amount during that time. And so, becomes it's like 2021, and UCSF is building these outpatient satellite clinics
Mhm.
all over the Bay Area. And so I was asked to be the art consultant for Berkeley and now for the Peninsula one.
Mhm.
And that's been really exciting because, when we talk about like putting different groups together, I have an art studio in Sausalito with 150 other artists. And I wanted to bring them into this because I think, having an art studio is a beautiful thing. And we're very fortunate to be able to have that. But it's also very isolating. And also, there are artists, many of the artists in the building who want to give back also. And
Mhm.
so I've included them in the Canvas project, the 6 by 6 inch canvases. So they're doing the Canvas project. Many of them are wanting to donate their work for the new building, and their work is beautiful and their work is relatable to the patients who will be, and also to the medical staff. So that's been really exciting.
Mhm.
And in addition to that, the Cancer Center asked me to write a book on the artwork that's in the Mission Bay Cancer Center. And
Mhm.
so I selected 19 artists whose work is on display there who have a relationship to health, because I thought that was really interesting. And the book is filled with essays, including a friend of mine who's a neuroscientist and a dancer.
Mhm.
And I was really interested in what happens to the brain when the artist is working on artwork that they know will be in a cancer center, or when they don't even know, but their work is selected. And how does that feel for them?
Mhm.
Also, their relationship with health, because some of them have been sick themselves, knowing their work is in the cancer center where they were treated. And then the other part of that is how do the patients feel looking at the artwork? So, what happens to their brain when they're looking at the artwork?
Wow.
And then in the book, I also had like, I was really curious, like the architects, like, what do you think about the Cancer Center? Like, what do you think about working on the Cancer Center as an architect? Or the guy who was head of the building, the executive director of building, or whatever his title was, of actually building the Cancer Center. What did that feel like for him? And then patients, like a patient who talked about being diagnosed at the beginning of COVID and then walking in and seeing all the artwork,
Mm.
and what difference did it make with her? And she ended up being the editor for my book. So to include these people and bring them all together has been really exciting. And the book is at the publisher now. It won't be sold. It's really meant to be as a gift for donors and people in the hospital. But um, yeah, it's my
I want a copy of it for
book.
sure.
Right.
Yeah. I'll
It,
have to
it's
donate so I can get a copy.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, so I mean, it's so stimulating for me to be able to continue this, and to be a passion with this work, and to find my time. I'm a multitasker, I guess I would call it, because I have time for my big kids and my little kids, and of course my husband and I will travel, not often, but as much as we can. And he's working also, and that's another motivator, because we're both very engaged in life. I think my life is I just feel so interested in everything,
Mm.
and find ideas and excitement about the possibilities that lie ahead. And I always laugh. I always say to myself, I'm in a hurry. Like, there's a lot of things I want to do, and I'm and I love everything. I mean, there's nothing I really want to give up. So
I I think it's exactly right. I mean, I think there's such amazing themes from all of your work that everybody can learn from around that idea of creating, how do you include people, right? Like that's such a superpower for you.
it's community, right?
Yeah, building
Yeah.
community. Exactly. I'm actually giving a talk about that at Columbia next year that I'm working on right now. So this is like perfect timing. You're gonna be all over this presentation.
Oh, goodness.
But also that curiosity, right? I mean, I think that's another thing, like along with our listening skills, that's one thing that I talked about in my book too, is that, to be just mad at everything all the time is, I mean, that's fine. That's a choice. You can be mad at everything all the time, but to be curious about it instead, and to really try to be, very open-minded and curious and wanting to investigate, how did things get the way that they got and how can we change it? And I mean, that's just to me such a better way to live. Like it's so, you find so many interesting things when you're curious about it, right? And
Right.
really talk to the construction workers and the architects and the physicians
Right.
and patients, and to understand, the very, very complex tapestry that goes into our healthcare system. Yeah, I love that. I wish I could just bottle you up and have like a morning coffee every day with
Well, we can Zoom. We could certainly Zoom every day,
We're
and then
gonna Zoom with
every
someone.
month meet in person.
I think that would be fantastic. I think that would make me very happy to do that. That
Yeah,
would be incredible.
yeah,
Um,
me as well.
yeah. Any other, advice to share with other people who are trying to create programs or sustain programs, or, who feel, how can I be more like you in your success, what you've been able to do?
Well, I think if you can find one person to believe in you,
Mm,
I think that will propel you forward.
mhm.
I think if you can learn certain aspects of who you are, like how to be a good listener, how to engage with people, how to not be afraid to ask those questions. How do you raise money? Well, ask people. I always say with the arts and health, it's like, ask people. There are people that know these answers, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right?
Mhm.
It's already been done. And
Mhm.
so ask away. I think that's really people certainly find me and they ask me, and I'm more than happy to engage with them.
Yeah.
Um, Also create community. Like, I think the NOAA, the Organization for the Arts and Health, is really important because it gathers like people together who are interested in the same field. And so people can talk to each other and they can relate to each other and they can help each other. And I think that that's crucially important. Um, but so much, this is hard work. I mean, this is really how people die. You have to really look at what it means to be alive and what it means to die.
Mm.
You need to be able to carry that with you in your heart. People used to say to my husband, doesn't she get depressed all the time? And his response to that was, well, she's the most optimistic person I ever met. So no, because my feeling about death and dying is that had I not been doing this work, I would have never met the most amazing people.
Mm.
And so many years ago, I made this handmade book for myself. And I didn't want to remember how many patients had died. I wanted to remember who they were.
Mm.
And so if there was an obituary or a story about them that I wanted to write in this book, I would, because it was, and it still is really important for me to remember them and to honor their life and to know for me personally what a privilege it was to have had an opportunity to know them.
Mm. That's perfect. I mean, I'm sure you've learned such incredible lessons from all these people along the way, right?
So much. It's such a gift. It's really such a gift. Yeah.
Oh, well, I feel very lucky. I feel like this was a gift. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for sharing with us. And I think there are so many people who need to hear what you have been able to do and your enthusiasm and your energy. And I think you're exactly right. Just inviting people in is so important and it's so fun. And that fun and that energy, that's very different than, feeling like you're begging for money, right? That's not
Right.
that we're doing. We are
That never works.
yeah, you're involving people in something really special. This is something I struggled with myself with my book too, right? The process of asking for blurbs for a book is like one of the more psychologically, it's a hard,
Right.
right? You have to take your baby and go to somebody who's powerful and owes you a favor and say, "Hey, can you tell me if my baby is ugly or not?" Right?
Right.
But
Right.
that's one way of thinking about it. And another way is to say, like, what an amazing honor it is to be asked to do that, right? And what an incredible thing to be invited in to be a part of somebody's book, right? And to lend your voice to somebody's project. And
Right.
that you can just flip that script of like, oh, wouldn't you be sad if somebody didn't ask you to do this,
Right.
right?
Right.
Don't
Right.
block people out, invite people, and it is a much more sustainable and less psychologically fraught way to go and ask
Right.
for people.
It's interesting. The oncologist who hired me all those years ago, at the beginning, I was creating all these projects and people were starting to call me up and they would say, oh, across the country, oh, can I do this project or can you tell me more about it? Or I want to do what you're doing or whatever it
Mhm.
was. And so I went to the oncologist, Dr. Rosenbaum, who had hired me. And I said to him, I don't know what to do. I said, isn't this my intellectual property? I've created these projects. They're, the Firefly Project, I created it in 1992. I've carried it every year since. And he looked at me and he said to me, give it away. He
Mm-hmm.
said to me, give it away. He said, you have a responsibility to give away all these great things that you're doing because there's no point in holding it close to you. Then it goes nowhere. But if you give it away, who knows how, like the ripples, right?
Yeah.
Where it can grow.
Yeah.
And I never forgot that. And I'm so grateful to him for that.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, had I not been doing this work, you would have never gotten in touch with me, right? I mean, we may have met just because of who we are,
Yeah.
but how great it is that those ripples happened, right?
Yes. So great. I know I'm so grateful for the book project and that it's such an amazing thing to have a project and have a reason to contact somebody and just say, hey, let's
Yeah,
talk. And then 99% of the time people are delighted to be contacted and they do want to
right,
talk and everybody loves to
exactly.
listen to.
Well,
And
you're such a great interviewer. My
yeah,
God.
you're a
Yeah.
very easy interview. I think that does not necessarily count.
Well, yeah. Thank you.
But this has been wonderful. Where can people learn more about you? You know, should they go to NOAA? How can people get connected?
Well,
With it?
so people can contact me directly at CD PERLIS@gmail.com.
Nice.
Yeah,
That's it.
anyway, any way
Yeah.
they can, I try to get back to people as quickly as possible.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, you are such a resource, and I'm so glad that you have been able to do all this incredible work. So many people's lives have been impacted by your approach and your energy and your optimism. And I count myself very much in that bucket. So thank you so much.
Well, ditto. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.